May 16th, 1940. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill has been far more optimistic about what's going on than his French counterparts. He looks back on his great war days and thinks to himself, surely the German tanks will have to stop and take a breather sooner rather than later. But then Churchill arrives in the French capital. He looks over the maps, speaks to the despondent French generals, and sees the civil servants burning their documents. Finally, the scales fall from his eyes, and he realizes the fatality of it all. Paris is doomed. I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome to our World War II mini-series 10 Days in Sedan, where we cover the German thrust through the Ardennes, the rage of the Reich, and the new confrontation between old enemies at Sedan, the crucible where the fate of the Axis and Allies converge. Join me as we explore the course of the battle and its aftermath. Okay, last time we saw how a French counterattack at Sedan failed, allowing Heinz Guderian's 19th Panzer Corps to start its breakout into open country. French 2nd Army Commander Charles Hunziker basically opened the door for Guderian by shifting his defenses to the south. Nearby, Georg Hans Reinhardt's 41st Panzer Corps broke through French defenses and pushed ahead to Montcornet. Further north, Max von Hartlieb's 5th Panzer Division defeated a superior French tank force at the Battle of Flavion, allowing Erwin Rommel's units to push on ahead far into the French rear. French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud informed Churchill that the battle for France was lost. This morning, as he prepares to travel to Paris, Churchill is nowhere near as despondent as his French counterpart. As he told Reynaud yesterday, he believes that sooner or later the Germans will have to stop as their supply lines become impossibly stretched. After all, that's how it was during the German spring offensive back in March 1918. Then, as now, the enemy made a dramatic break through the Allied lines, spearheaded by fast-moving shock troops. But the attack had run out of momentum fairly quickly because the supply lines simply could not keep up, and the Allies used their reserves to launch a counteroffensive. However, it is no longer 1918. It is 1940, and the Prime Minister's appreciation of warfare has fallen behind the times. Here's how Churchill puts it after the war. I had seen a good deal of this sort of thing in the previous war, and the idea of the line being broken, even on a broad front, did not convey to my mind the appalling consequences that now flowed from it. Not having had access to official information for so many years, I did not comprehend the violence of the revolution effected since the last war by the incursion of a mass of fast-moving heavy armor. I knew about it, but it had not altered my inward convictions as it should have done. Let's now check in with two of the German generals who are currently enacting that violent revolution of fast-moving heavy armor. This morning, Heinz Guderian leaves the 10th Panzer Division and Infantry Regiment Großdeutschland to continue the fighting at Ston, a small village which is almost directly south of Sedan, just on the edge of the growing German salient. Despite its tiny size, the fighting at Ston is incredibly fierce, and in years to come, French troops will compare it with Verdun in the Great War, and German soldiers with Stalingrad and Monte Cassino from this one. The reason for the violence here is that both sides have ascribed huge significance to the village. The French 21st Corps commander, Jean Flavigny, believes he must control the nearby highlands of the Stone Massif if he is to counterattack against the German salient. Guderian recognizes this, and he's determined to prevent the French taking back control. Yesterday, Flavigny launched a delayed and uncoordinated attack by elements of the French 3rd Armored and 3rd Motorized Divisions. Attacking in piecemeal fashion, the Germans were able to pick off the French Char B1 bis heavy tanks one by one. Flavigny has ordered that Ston must be retaken this morning. So at 7 a.m., 2 French tank battalions supported by an infantry battalion advance on the village after a 45-minute artillery barrage and push the Germans out of Ston. It is during this fight that one of the most dramatic events of this entire series occurs, when Captain Pierre Billotte and his Char-B take out something like a dozen German panzers as they're lined up on the road. He hits the lead tank, blowing it up. He hits the rear tank, blowing it up too. Then he destroys all the others in between. His tank takes 140 hits from the enemy, but the Germans simply cannot penetrate the thick armor of the Char B1 bis. At least that's how the story goes. It almost sounds too impressive to be true. Now, on the one hand, pretty much the only source we have of this happening is Belot's own memoirs, which have been repeated mostly uncritically by historians and authors in the decades after the battle. He was also raised up as a national hero by the French state. But this strategy he uses of hitting the lead and rear tanks before picking off the trapped vehicles in between is something pretty standard that is taught to tank commanders across the world. And as we saw at Flavion, the Char B1 bis is a real beast and is almost impervious to fire from the Panzer III and Panzer IV. If he got the jump on a column of vehicles just sitting in the road, it is not inconceivable that he could take them all out. This is maybe one of the possible myths that needs a bit more looking into and could well be true. The intensity of the fighting here has only made the French more determined to control the village. In fact, Charles Hunziker, commander of the French Second Army, has concluded that Stonne is key to the whole German plan. He thinks the advance westward out of the bridgehead by the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions is really just a diversion or a probing mission. In his mind, the real German attack will be a drive southeast by the 10th Panzer Division via Stonne to attack the fortifications of the Maginot Line from the rear. So he decided to shift his forces onto a line running from Attigny to Inor on the southern side of the German salient. In effect, this has opened the door for Guderian's other 2 divisions to race ahead while the French grind themselves down in the hell of Stonne. Further fighting took place at Stonne on the 16th of May and subsequent days. The French tanks performed well, and the village changed hands several times. Unfortunately, this battle had become irrelevant, since Guderian was already pushing northwestwards into France. The caution and hesitation of Flavigny and the impetuosity and boldness of Guderian perfectly encapsulated the difference between the French and the Germans in 1940. Let's leave Stonne for now and check in with the main German drive westward. I'll start not with Guderian, but with Georg Hans von Reinhard and the 41st Panzer Corps. Yesterday, the 6th Panzer Division from the Corps, under Werner Kempf, reached Montcornet. In doing so, they essentially ambushed a hastily established blocking force consisting of General Albert Boucher's French 2nd Armored Division. Kempf's forces managed to smash up several of the soft-skinned supply columns and catch some of the tanks while they were assembling. Things are no better for 2nd Armored Division today. The wheeled vehicles have advanced by road, with the tanks being transported by rail, as we saw last time. This means that any cohesion has been lost, and units have been scattered across a wide area. Unlike the Germans, the French continue to insist on deploying their tanks in small groups, rather than concentrating them in a larger force. This morning, Bruch can only locate 7 of his 12 tank companies, and these 7 are scattered in an area of about 80 by 60 kilometers. The 8th Panzer Division under Adolf Friedrich Kunzen gets itself forward. He advances along the Liard-Montcornet line and finishes the job that the 6th Panzer Division started yesterday. This newly formed panzer wedge thrust its way right through the middle of the scattered elements of Boucher's division, which was thus torn apart into 2 halves along the Liard-Montcornet line. As if things could get any worse, most of the supply elements with the fuel trucks and the regular units were in the south, whereas the French tanks were cut off from them farther north. A number of Char B battle tanks were standing on the railroad flat cars, almost without gas, in the unloading stations when they were surprised by Reinhardt's panzers. A later report prepared by the Parliamentary Investigating Commission said, as of the 16th of May, there is no longer any 2nd Armored Division. There are only scattered units whose commanders are trying as best they can to maintain order and to carry out all kinds of amended orders, to avoid air raids and German panzer spearheads, while command agencies of all kinds trying to get through to them only add to the confusion. As for Guderian, the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions break through the French defenses on the line of hills west of the Ardennes Canal and then push westward on parallel axes of advance, although the French troops in their path really do not make things easy for them. The 1st Panzer Division takes the southern route, with its right wing clashing with the 3rd Spahi Brigade. The North African cavalrymen fight tenaciously, but are eventually defeated after a long battle. The left wing engages the leading elements of the 14th Infantry Division, part of the newly formed 6th Army under General Robert Touchon. The 14th is one of the French Army's elite units, and they prove themselves worthy opponents. But the problem, once again, is that the French simply haven't been able to get enough of the division's men to the front quickly enough, and the Germans are really only fighting against one regiment's worth of men. By nightfall, the French regiment has been forced to retreat towards Rethel. Meanwhile, the 2nd Panzer Division takes the northerly route, pushing towards the 53rd Motorized Infantry Division. Soon, Guderian's forces reach Montcornet. Two bridgeheads have become one, and Guderian and Reinhardt congratulate each other on their progress and then plan the next steps of the campaign. The French have formed up their next line of defense along the Sambre and Oise rivers. In doing so, they have finally abandoned the deal plan under which they entered this whole war. Well, the Western Allies entered this whole war. This means pulling back French and British forces in Belgium and ceding their previous positions to the approaching German infantry of Army Groups A and B. The main Allied focus has finally, at the 11th hour, swung to the south. After hours of indecision, the GQG finally issued an order on the morning of the 16th of May for Blanchard's First Army and the BEF to abandon the Deal position and fall back to the Escaut River. If Panzer Group Kleist could be stopped east of the Sambre River, the fortified area at Maubeuge would serve as a linchpin for the new line. Billotte transferred 3 strong regular divisions to his right flank, while GQG began transferring 3 divisions from the quiet sectors of the Maginot Line to reinforce Touchon, who was reforming south of the Aisne River. The right flank here refers to the 9th Army, which has been badly mauled over the last few days. As I said last time, Commander-in-Chief of the Northeast, Alphonse Georges, has taken the 9th Army out of French Army Group 1 and placed it under his direct authority. And he's also sacked its commander, André Corrap, and replaced him with Henri Giraud. In terms of armored forces, the 9th has the battered remains of the 2nd Armored Division. Along the Oise, General Georges spread the scattered tank companies of the 2nd Armored Division at numerous crossing points. These small bouchons, corks, were leaderless. Boucher's command post was moving and totally lacked artillery and infantry support. Guderian and Reinhardt planned to strike quickly and hit the French before they can properly set things up. But the rapid advance of the panzers on May 16th threatens Guderian's control over his forces. Guderian is driving his panzer wedge deep into the French rear, and this means he now has extremely long and exposed flanks because the infantry divisions that are supposed to be protecting them simply cannot keep up. Guderian doesn't really mind this, though, as he believes that speed and aggression are a defense in themselves. The rapidity of his advance means the panzers have been striking the enemy while he is unprepared and inflicting chaos on the French command and control network. As he puts it, so long as you yourself stay in motion, so long will you also keep the enemy in motion and prevent him from getting a strong foothold. As we have seen with the shambolic French attempts to bring forward armored units and counterattack over the last few days, Guderian's assessment is mostly correct so far. He believes that waiting around for the German infantry will only give the French more time to get themselves together. This all stems from what we might call Guderian's progressive views on armored warfare. See, he's a zealous believer in the value of independent armored forces and mobile warfare. But at this point, he is still in the minority. That's why the officers higher up the chain of command overlooked him for the job of overall commander when they put together the Panzer Group. The men making the decision, like Army Group A Commander Gerd von Rundstedt, Army Chief of Staff Franz Halder, Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch, they believed that Ewald von Kleist was better suited. He had better experience commanding armored units in Poland, but his temperament, age, and background as a cavalry officer meant that he could be relied on to rein in more headstrong officers like Guderian and Rommel. Hence Panzer Group Kleist and not Panzer Group Guderian. Kleist has walked a bit of a tightrope between the aggressive subordinate commanders and his more cautious superiors. Twice now, he has tried to rein Guderian in, and twice has allowed Guderian to talk him out of it. Kleist has also fudged his situation reports to Army Group A, giving the impression that things aren't quite as extreme as they actually are. But Kleist is definitely nervous about the situation, and things start to come to a head today. See, at 4:30 in the afternoon, Kleist passes on an order from Rundstedt saying that Guderian is not to advance beyond a line stretching from Beaumont to Hirson to Montcornet to Guincourt. He does say that advanced elements of the Panzer's forces can head over to the Oise River to seize bridges, but that he prohibits an advance beyond the Oise until at least May 18th, by which point infantry will have been brought up to cover the southern flank. But by now, 4 Panzer divisions are already racing to their objectives on the Oise and Sambre, and Guderian certainly doesn't call them back. Things are perhaps a bit more complicated than a simple case of just disobeying orders. Kleist may have issued this order at 4:30 in the afternoon, but according to some accounts, Guderian doesn't receive it until just after midnight, when an officer from the Panzer Group finally gets through to him. By that point, the 1st Panzer Division is already fighting for its bridgehead. Guderian decides that the order is outdated and radios back that he will continue to attack. Of course, Kleist is not happy. Guderian has taken things too far, and Kleist summons him to a meeting scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. We shall see how this all plays out next time and get to the bottom of who is actually responsible for this halt order. Elsewhere on the front, Rommel is surging ahead, seemingly in open defiance of his orders. Yesterday, he sidestepped the French armored counterattack at Flavion and made a rapid push to Foix-Chapelle. By the early hours of this morning, the lead elements of his 7th Panzer Division are approaching the French border and a string of fortifications known as the fortified sector of Maubeuge. These fortifications lie beyond the Rundstedt halt line, so whatever their strength, Rommel really should not be trying to break through them. But you probably already know where this is going. And yes, before long, Rommel will be trying to break through these very fortifications. There is a bit of a confused sequence of events here, okay? Shortly before 8 a.m., Rommel's parent formation, the 4th Army, receives the order from Army Group A that clearly forbids breaking through the fortification line. Both Rundstedt and von Brauchitsch are concerned about the threat to the northern flank and want the panzers to wait until infantry divisions are moved up. However, it seems that 4th Army Commander Günther von Kluge is open to a bit more risk than his superiors. At noon, he orders that 7th Panzer Division can advance towards the French border and scout the defensive lines. But he reiterates there is to be no breakthrough. Kluge apparently emphasizes that order with an exclamation mark. Rommel's forces begin probing the defensive line, and when there is no hint of a French counterattack, Kluge further liberalizes his orders and gives the green light to attempt a limited push west in the direction of Avesnes. But the push that Rommel undertakes is by no means limited, and as we shall see, it goes far beyond Avesnes. At about 6 p.m., Rommel's lead forces cross the French border at Clairface and soon encounter the defensive structures. Okay, a quick word on the fortified sector of Maubeuge. This is part of the Maginot Line, but the defensive structures are nowhere near as well developed as what we might call the strong Maginot Line, which ends just south of Sedan. This is closer to the plains where the fortresses are fewer. Still, like at Sedan, if properly employed, manned, and backed up by reserves of forces, these defensive works should be significant obstacles. Rommel probably should wait for additional infantry support and Luftwaffe dive bombers, but he correctly figures that the element of surprise is more valuable than additional force. His panzers push through the first line of defenses before the French defenders really know what's happening. But once they recognize the danger, the 84th Regiment of the French 101st Fortress Infantry Division, they fight back hard. A German panzer commander recounts the following as the sun starts to go down. 2 vehicles are knocked out, and also from the right an anti-tank gun fires and hits the command tank of the heavy company. The radio operator has a leg shot off, commander unhurt. I am close by with my tank but take cover. Enemy artillery fires heavily on us with medium caliber guns. How are we going to get through the bunker line? Big question. In front of us is a thick wire entanglement, behind it a broad and deep panzer ditch, and in the middle of the road anti-tank obstacles have been built. German artillery works to silence some of the rear positions, while the panzers engage the blockhouses with their cannons. Meanwhile, the engineers are able to creep forward and neutralize pillboxes using satchel charges and flamethrowers, while the motorcycle troops use their speed and mobility to take out anti-tank guns and machine gun nests. After the engineers clear a roadblock consisting of massive Czech hedgehogs, the panzers are able to drive through in force and take out the defensive structures with flanking fire. Around 11 that night, the tanks, motorcycles, and armored cars breach the second defensive line, and they are soon staring at wide open country. Surging forward, the 7th Panzer Division makes a frontal assault on the French artillery park, blowing it away. Rommel decides he must exploit this breakthrough and orders his division to advance forward along the road to Avesnes. Here he has a stroke of luck as he runs straight into the French 5th Motorized Infantry Division, which has camped out for the night with its vehicles parked on either side of the road. Along with them is most of the artillery belonging to the French 1st Armored Division. The French were caught flat-footed by Rommel's Panzer 38 light tanks, which moved down the road to Avesnes, shooting up trucks and other wheeled vehicles. All of the 1st Armored Regiment's artillery was captured, and the 5th Motorized Infantry Division scattered. Rommel pushed on, entering Avesnes around midnight. The 7th Panzer Division has left a trail of destruction along the road with burnt-out tanks, trucks, and other vehicles scattered behind him. French troops, woken from their sleep, surrender en masse, and civilians from nearby villages come to witness the carnage for themselves. Once again, Rommel chooses to push ahead. His aggressive strategy is certainly paying off, but he is outrunning the slower-moving elements of his division. The main body of his force, including the 2 rifle regiments, has settled down on the Franco-Belgian border for the night, almost 20 kilometers away. The divisional headquarters is still all the way back in Frère-Chapelle, almost 50 kilometers to the rear. The situation here is close to chaos. See, Rommel has deliberately ensured that he is unreachable by radio, and his operations officer is now dealing with frantic inquiries from Corps headquarters as to where the 7th Panzer Division actually is. Inquiries that he himself simply cannot answer. It is this night, when Rommel goes missing, which earns his division its moniker, the Ghost Division. Someone else who is asking questions to which there is apparently no answer is Winston Churchill. The British Prime Minister departs London at around 3 p.m. and arrives in Paris about an hour later. Soon after he steps down from his de Havilland Flamingo plane at Le Bourget Airport, Churchill is quickly disabused of some of his relative optimism that he had yesterday. After a stop at the British Embassy, Churchill arrives at the French Foreign Ministry about 5:30 and is ushered into a room for a meeting with Prime Minister Paul Reynaud and the top brass. I will quote Churchill's description of the scene. I was conducted into one of its fine rooms. Reynaud was there, Daladier, Minister of National Defense and War, and General Gamelin, Commander-in-Chief of the French Armed Forces. Utter dejection was written on every face. The Commander-in-Chief briefly explained what had happened. A heavy onrush of armored vehicles was advancing with unheard-of speed towards Amiens and Arras, with the intention, apparently, of reaching the coast at Abbeville or thereabouts. Alternatively, they might make for Paris. The general talked perhaps 5 minutes without anyone saying a word. When he stopped, there was a considerable silence. I then asked, "Where is the strategic reserve?" General Gamelin turned to me, and with a shake of his head and a shrug, said, "Aucune." None. There was another long pause. Outside in the garden, clouds of smoke arose from large bonfires, and I saw from the window venerable officials pushing wheelbarrows of archives onto them. Already, therefore, the evacuation of Paris was being prepared. We shall have to see whether or not Paris is doomed, for this is where I will leave things today. There's been brutal fighting at Stone, a final realization of the seriousness of the situation by the French, and an eye-opening trip to Paris for Winston Churchill. Through it all, Guderian, Reinhardt, and Rommel keep on racing ahead to the consternation of their commanders. It seems the only thing that might hold back the German tide is the German command itself. But the French do have some units that they can throw into the battle. Who are those units? Well, I will cover all of that in next week's thrilling episode. All I can say for now is that a certain colonel named Charles de Gaulle is waiting for the order to attack. Maybe, just maybe, the French can salvage something from this inferno. Our Time Ghost Army Ardennes Amigo of the Week is Halden Lindstrom. Be like Halden and join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com I'll say that again. Join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com to help keep our divisions driving forwards. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of this series. Oh, and a complete side note. I know some of you are Americans out there watching this and you might be baseball fans. And completely separate from Time Ghost, I've started a super nerdy, stat-heavy, deep baseball history podcast, an audio podcast that you can get pretty much everywhere. It's called Indy Neidel's Baseball History Time Machine. There's something like 12 half-hour episodes out, so go check that out at anywhere where you check out podcasts. Okay, see you next time.